So I am very thrilled to be here with a friend and colleague at Real Progressives, Jonathan Kadmon, who's one of our fantastic writers and volunteers. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
A quick plug before we dive into your article, realprogressives.org, where you can find all of our fantastic content from articles by writers like Jonathan to our podcasts and MMT educational material. Realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to help us out. We are a nonprofit. And I also wanted to quickly plug Jonathan's Twitter. Go give him a follow at Jonathan Kadmon. Super easy to remember. He's always online and posting very valuable educational things at Jonathan Kadmon on Twitter. So we're going to talk today about an article that you wrote about a month and a half ago. I'm a little bit late having you on this one, but I think it was so fantastic it's worth bringing up again. This again is on the Real Progressives website. It's titled "The Emperors New Commodities," and I'm just going to start by reading these first couple of paragraphs, and then I'll have Jonathan dive into some of the details. Our lives and livelihoods are being threatened in the direst of ways on a daily basis, camouflaged in the opaque language of financial and economic jargon. Every TV channel and newspaper features some big brain discussing inflation and talking about the economy running hot and the need to curb demand to bring down prices. The translation of this word salad is that they think inflation is caused by you, the average American who can't afford $400 for an emergency, having entirely too much money in your pocket. They believe that if you just have less to spend, prices will come down. The problem with that, aside from the obvious stupidity and gross misdiagnosis of the sources of inflation, is that it will fail spectacularly and may even place the future of the country in jeopardy. In the real world, there are things we want and things we need. The things we need don't become less necessary because the price changes. Food, housing, gas, transportation, and utilities are things we need. They happen to be what is driving the current inflation. The only way to drive down demand for those things is to remove people's ability to survive, and that is exactly what is being casually embraced by politicians and pundits. Historically, this method of governing has ended very poorly for the existing power structure. So, Jonathan, you talk a lot about sort of the price elasticity, and you kind of started to get into it there in terms of describing the differences between different types of commodities. Can you just start by kind of briefly explaining what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the difference between need it's and want it's. In fact, one of the first examples I bring up is healthcare as something that is what we call price inelastic. It means, you will pay the price because you need it rather than want it. So if you're having a heart attack, you need an intervention, a stent, a catheterization, open heart surgery, whatever, whether it costs 500 or 500,000. Like if you don't get it, you will die. So you will pay whatever the price is in order to survive. And those are things like very few things are as totally price inelastic as healthcare, but it's a great example of, stuff that basically has a floor for demand. You need it because you need it. Like if you don't eat, you will starve. If you don't have rent money, okay, you will be without shelter in the extreme heat of the summer or the extreme cold of the winter, and you will probably die. You need fuel, transportation fuel to, get to and from work to make the money to pay the rent or buy the food or pay for the health care or whatever. And if you don't have that stuff, you're in a lot of trouble. Like there is an element of coercion here. And, it's not this, magical, free market type situation where everybody's freely making choices and they're free to choose not to. That's not an option. And if you look at the, most recent, actually all of the CPI releases over the last year or so, the very things that are driving inflation right now are need-its, not want-its.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In fact, the prices of things like big screen televisions and PlayStations have actually dropped precipitously relative to other things. And, because people can't afford them anymore. And those things do respond to price signals. But gasoline, food, energy, those kinds of things don't respond to normal price signals because they have basically a defined floor. Like you can't go below that level of demand because you need those things. You don't want them.
Yeah, and you also talk about how those in particular sort of have a connection to each other that can cause some vicious cycles. Obviously, we need to transport food from where it is grown or produced to where you're buying it at the store. Energy is required for the production and packaging as well as at the store itself. Can you talk a little bit about how those things are all connected and can kind of lock each other in a way that, like, these mainstream pundits who think that you can just manipulate the market slightly as though it's a big screen TV seem to not be willing to recognize?
Right. And they want to consider these things in a vacuum, and they don't exist in a vacuum. And, that's the bottom line is they are all interconnected. So even if you don't drive a car, even if you don't drive a car, the food gets to the grocery store because somebody drives it there. So you can't say the gasoline stuff doesn't apply to you because you ride your bike to work. It doesn't work that way. It's not about your choices because all of these things are bundled into one another. And, we live in a society, which is incidentally kind of the crux of the topic of my next article. Hopefully you'll have me back on for that. But it's, these things are interconnected and they cause a feedback loop. And, we've seen before, just when the price of gasoline or diesel spikes, prices at the grocery store also spiked. I think that was in the wake of, I can't even remember what hurricane or whatever, but there were some issues around the Gulf during the Obama years, and for a couple of months, prices started spiking big time at the grocery store. There's a reason for that. Like these things are all with these essential goods, these price inelastic goods that we're talking about, energy, transportation, fuel, food. The distribution systems are all interconnected with one another. As these things have consolidated, supply chains have consolidated, these things are, what happens to one basically happens to all. And there's a certain degree to which corporations understand better than your average person the fact that they live in a society and that what happens to one of them happens to all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So for some in the audience who may have a more rudimentary understanding of this stuff than you do, Jonathan, can you maybe give just a very quick Econ 101 explanation? I think this is a little overly simplified, but still useful. Can you just explain the difference between demand pull inflation and supply push inflation? And then from there, we can start to talk about how you actually might go about solving some of these problems.
Demand pull inflation is demand pull or demand push?
I think it's pull. I might have said it backwards.
Yeah. Now I'm having a brain fart. No, like demand-driven inflation is almost never a thing, largely because it self-corrects, but it's basically saying the inflation is coming from too much demand, chasing too few goods. And the thing is, for most people, it responds to, like, people respond to price signals for the most part, for everything except essential goods, which of course have nothing to do, like the demand is the demand, regardless of what people want or need. So I wouldn't, but on the supply end, I'm kind of garbling up this explanation. When the problem is on the supply end, but not the demand end, these things are, a lot harder to resolve. They don't respond to price signals because, you can only supply what you can supply.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, just very quickly, all of the instances, there's often fear-mongering about hyperinflation. All of the instances that I'm aware of actual true hyperinflation come from the supply side, and we often misdiagnose them as being the exact opposite. So I just think it's important to point that out.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case. Even the stuff in Weimar Germany, a lot of us were taught in school that came from printing money, but people who have examined that situation show that the problem came from the debt, and the actual inflation preceded the money printing. Like they printed the money so that people would have the money so that they wouldn't starve. But the printing of the money, or whatever, as they may have called it back then, didn't actually cause the inflation. The inflation was caused by the massive foreign debts, and the people that were the holders of that debt basically saying your currency, like, we don't like your currency anymore. It's worthless to us. And that sort of thing is what causes hyperinflation. I think people also mistake what hyperinflation is. Like, you're talking like 50 to 100% inflation, not 8 to 12% inflation.
Hmm.
That's not hyperinflation. That's just, higher inflation than we're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one thing you kind of bring up is that a lot of these things are made, I think, almost intentionally to be like sort of perceived by the public as overly convoluted and complex.
Mhm.
And you point out that we're kind of taught to like rely on the quote unquote experts on these issues. Can you talk about how that's problematic?
Uh, Man, that's why that article was so long because the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
article, the whole article is about why that's problematic. Like sometimes these people just don't even know any better. Like I believe some of these people that I'm seeing, on social media, some of these economists actually believe this stuff. And in a sense, it's brainwashed, it's epistemically flawed. Then there are actual bad actors, people like Larry Summers, who's basically consider it their job to run interference for elite interests and launder it through a lot of this economistic rhetoric. But whatever the case, what they're saying on TV is extremely misleading and is designed to basically create a snow job on. Are you still there, Luke?
yes, yes.
Okay. I can't see you.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah. Steve keeps telling me not to look at the screen, but anyway,
yeah.
um,
No, carry
it,
on.
it basically, like they're set up to run interference on ordinary people so that they can't really comprehend what's going on. Because if they did, they'd be like, "What? What did
Yeah,
you just say? You're going to try and take away my money because you think I have too much and that's causing inflation? Are you nuts?"
yeah,
Okay, a
yeah,
lot of us are barely paying our bills. Like, because the inflation goes into everything, and one of those essential goods that's still getting inflated is housing costs. Okay, like a lot of us are living paycheck to paycheck and very close to the wire. And the notion that, making a bunch of us unemployed or driving down our wages is the solution. Like, wait, what?
yeah.
No,
It,
no.
like what question are we answering if that's the solution, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. It's in the whole framing of the issue is insane from the jump. We aren't even talking about getting to solutions that help real people. So you mentioned something that we tend to talk a lot about at RP, and that is a buffer stock, right? Bill Mitchell's talked about the wool buffer stock in Australia. We talk about a jobs guarantee, which is kind of a form of a buffer stock. Can you explain the concept of a buffer stock and how it can be used to combat inflation?
Yeah, it's also known as price collaring. Basically, where the government sets a price at which it will buy commodities and a price at which it will sell commodities. It basically sets the upper and lower parameters for what the price point is going to be, so that producers of a supply will never be left holding the bag if the prices suddenly drop because the government will say buy corn at $16 a kilogram or whatever, and say, okay, that's the minimum price. The government will automatically, like, if you can't sell it to anybody else at that price, the government will buy it at that price. Okay, so the
Hmm.
price can't go below that floor. And then, essentially, if the price goes above a certain level, the government will release that corn at $16 a kilogram or whatever, so that the price then goes down and it equalizes to whatever the ceiling price is. Sorry, it wouldn't be $16. Let's say the ceiling price is 18 or $20. So they're releasing it at that ceiling price so that they can then compete with people that are price gouging, and the price will have to come down because nobody's going to buy the more expensive stuff if the government's selling it that cheap.
Right.
And that's price collaring. It sets an upper and lower parameter. It's a relatively low impact. It doesn't, interfere with the free market. In fact, it works with it, if you want to call it that. It's totally compatible with everything, and it's very, very light touch. It doesn't involve the government forcing anybody to do anything. It just involves using the government's massive, pretty much unlimited purchasing power
Hmm.
to, help basically keep prices within normal parameters to withstand shocks. And
Yeah.
theoretically, we do already, like, that was the whole point of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We do have strategic stockpiles of other things, including cheese for whatever reason.
I was gonna say government cheese, right? The caves of cheese. Yeah.
Yeah, we have loads of that, but like the oil thing is not something we've been keeping up with the way we should, or really using to its full potential. The government could be buying up a whole bunch of oil on the spot market, okay, and then releasing it at a lower price to keep that price relatively low, or to withstand shocks, or to counter the impact of what the OPEC and what the Saudis are doing. All right, we could be handling that. In fact, even Ro Khanna, who hasn't always been the best on everything that we support, but in this case, he was taking a leaf right out of the book of people like Bob Hockett. Um, Even he had proposed, okay, like let's use the government power to do something like that. It's super easy. It's low impact. It's low political cost.
Yeah.
The worst you're gonna suffer is these ridiculous deficit hawks being like, oh, you spend too much money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, watch the CPI come down, and then let them talk about how that's going to cause inflation when you just dropped inflation.
Yeah. And a nice little side effect, and Bill also talks a lot about this with the wool scheme in Australia, is that there are jobs produced to literally execute this scheme. So it's a positive to me all around, and it should be used, especially with something like energy, right? Which is, as you pointed out earlier, so necessary for basic needs and things like food. And
I did. I put a link to Bob Hockett's article on that subject in there as well. But he's also been in contact with Isabella Weber, who wrote a great book on how this policy in China dates back thousands of years. And I think I think the commodities they were doing it with were things like iron and rice. Maybe was the other one. I don't remember what the other commodity was. But she found documents from like 1200 BC where they were doing this exact thing. This is an old, very reliable, way of basically keeping prices stable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the sort of the free market people, right? That seem to want everything to be solved by a market. But all of those, I think one thing that people often fail to recognize is that's all within the construct of the rules of the game, and someone has to set the rules of the game. Can you just talk a little bit about how, what the government's role is in markets, and how people seem to sort of misunderstand that?
Yeah, I mean, if there was one thing, if I could just cast a magic spell and make people like libertarians understand one thing, it's the role of power and coercion in markets. And that goes back to things like, the situations I was mentioning near the beginning of the article, where you're talking about need it's rather than want it's. Okay, there's an element of coercion when you're dealing with things you need rather than things you want. And there's a large degree to which people are going through the economy, pretty much as though they have a gun to their head. And, there is a certain degree to which the government can intervene in the market in such a way and set the rules in such a way that the market is more free and there's less situations where we are operating with a gun to our head. And, essentially things like, decommodifying essential goods like housing and, transportation and the things that we need to survive, healthcare especially. I mean, forget about it. Like decommodifying those things actually makes a market more free. Like paradoxically, a government taking over and or at least to some degree managing, the cost and distribution of these things and doing a little bit of planning actually keeps, lets the freer parts of the market operate freely, and where you can actually maximize choice and utility and all of that childish stuff that they think actually happens right now. When you take the coercive element, as much of the coercive element out of the equation as possible, everything gets more free, and you actually, start to see the benefits of, of basically what the libertarian crowd is after. Free choice, competition, stuff like that. Like the government has to make that happen. It doesn't happen naturally. It never did.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the
100%.
problem with any system based on competition is somebody wins.
Yeah.
Okay, and as soon as they win, they ratchet it in, they lock it in, and they make sure nobody else can compete with them. And that's what a system based on competition does when left unchecked. And you see that in northern Mexico with the drug cartels, and you know Afghanistan with the various warlords. Like this is what a system of competition without a referee eventually becomes, and it usually doesn't take very long to get there.
Yeah. This is also what a lot of corruption ultimately is about, right? If you and I are playing a board game that has evolving rules and you have the cash to buy off the referee, you're going to win the game. And I think that's ultimately what a lot of corruption in our system boils down to.
Yeah, it's not a bug. It's a feature. It's
Yeah.
like this is the system. Like the corruption
Yeah.
is the system.
Yeah. That's what they're relying upon. And actually, a nice little transition here. You mentioned I'm paraphrasing here, but you said something about how the financial sector is cannibalizing the economy. Can you talk a little bit about how the finance sector has kind of wreaked havoc on markets and on our economy and on the by and large?
Yeah, I mean that's been written on extensively. Probably, you know, that's probably also what helped make this thing as long as it was. It's the longest one that I've written here. I normally try to keep these things relatively concise so that people don't get the TLDR thing. But I did also put the audio feature on there so you could just listen to it while you're driving or something. But yeah, that does absolutely play a role into why our economy doesn't function the way it should. And I do outline a few ways in which frankly, when you deconstruct a lot of current financial shell games and the way the financial economy has started taking the lead in basically running the economy, how it's essentially hollowing out productivity. It's got perverse incentives and self-destructive long-term consequences, some of which we saw with the supply chain problems, but we've also seen more broadly in the pandemic. The fact that essentially the engine's technically running, but there's nobody behind the wheel. All of this stuff has been hollowed out. Even the ability to I illustrated some perverse incentives in that paragraph that I made reference to that specific phenomenon. The fact that the financialization has basically given the oil companies an incentive not to do further drilling and not to increase their oil refining capacity, even though it would be profitable to do so, because that's not what the shareholders want. The shareholders, like there's a particular financial innovation that I cite there that I pulled off of, one of, it was that guy James Lee, who has a YouTube channel. He also collaborates with
Breaking Points.
With Breaking Points. Made reference to that. Essentially, helped shareholders boost their stock equity at the expense of actual profitability. Like they want them to have less physical infrastructure and more stock equity. Lighter, meaner, whatever.
James did a wonderful bit on stock buybacks. I showed it on the show. For those who haven't seen it, go to Breaking Points and watch that clip. I thought he did a wonderful job. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was like this one also was similarly themed, but it took place like he did that particular segment like a month and a half ago, and he was talking particularly about oil production and what these financial shell games gave them an incentive to do. Like literally, they won't do things even that are profitable if they involve investing in infrastructure, physical infrastructure, productivity. Those are bad now because of financialization. And, essentially these financial shell games and fuzzy accounting have encouraged them to, cannibalize productive resources, try to convert it into cash or liquidity and basically sell off the pieces. Like they are literally destroying our, productive capacity and distributional capacity.
Yeah. In other words, the incentive is it really in no way tied to what is best for society or humanity, right? There's
Right.
absolutely no
They're
correlation.
literally cannibalizing necessary infrastructure and converting it into cash.
Yeah,
And that's the name of the game.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely unbelievable. So I just want to close here by I think your last paragraph was fantastic, and I want to read it for the viewers here. Addressing the current inflationary crisis is easy if the government is willing to act and to disregard the advice and inclinations of self-interested parties peddling catastrophic policy prescriptions. The heavier but no less essential lift is altering the structural rot that makes a reoccurrence of these conditions inevitable. The financial sector must be put back in its cage and secured with newer and more robust guardrails. The euthanasia of the rentier state must be a feature of state policy, not a bug. The natural decline or even elimination of the shadow banking sector, such as hedge funds and private equity firms, must be actively assisted, and such social parasites must be denied access to critical goods and services like housing, healthcare, and energy. Essential and inelastic goods and services must be decommodified and protected from price fluctuations and supply shocks. National single-payer healthcare and Australian-style public housing are within easy reach of an economy as powerful as that of the United States of America if we are willing to commit to it. The most important thing to commit to is unceasing and eternal public vigilance. When we leave the so-called experts and other interested parties unsupervised, the interests of honest people are under threat. The only way these will be upheld and secured in perpetuity is if we come together to insist upon it, never again to relent. Wonderful, wonderful piece there, Jonathan. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. Once again, want to encourage the audience to go to realprogressives.org to find more of Jonathan's work and our other fantastic writers as well. Realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to give us a hand. And please do go follow Jonathan at Jonathan Kadmon on Twitter. Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time today and look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks for having me.